Welcome to the C-Suite Mentor, the place where you will learn the tools, strategies, and mindset to scale your business sustainably and build a lasting legacy. I'm your host, Theresa Cantley. As a fellow CEO, I understand what it takes to scale a business to 7 and multiple 8 figures. It's not necessarily what you might think. It requires a complete shift in how you think, strategize, and execute key actions in your business. My mission is to help CEOs step back into the driver's seat of their business by optimizing their operations, empowering their team, and staying in total alignment with their big vision. So, are you ready to exchange everything that hasn't worked for strategies that will? You're in the right place, so let's go. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Amuse Bouche Leadership Bites to help you grow your business, to help you scale your business, to help you align your team, and all kinds of other stuff. And today I am joined by a special guest. You are actually the first person I've ever had on the show that does what you do, besides my husband. My husband's an M&A, but you're the first person that I've had on here. So I am excited to have you on the show. Welcome, Jay Calandra.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So funny story about Jay. So when I was growing up, we both grew up in the Lehigh Valley, and my mom used to always shop at this store, Calandra Cheese Shop, and she was obsessed with this store. Well, over the years, they ended up, which we're going to talk a little bit about it, but the store ended up closing. And it was funny because I was on LinkedIn and I, was doing my thing where I connect with people and just, build relationships. And I come across Jay Calandra and I'm like, oh, I'm going to connect with this guy. Lo and behold, his family was the one that owned the shop. And I was like, hey, bring it back. It was amazing. So anyway, that's a little background about how I met Jay. But since then, we've had a couple conversations. We have a lot of alignment as far as working with Main Street businesses. I mean, he was a Main Street business owner. I was a Main Street business owner at one time. Well, your family was. Well, actually, you were too, because you did own a Main Street business. So we've had a lot of really great conversations about, how important it is to make sure that these businesses not just survive, but thrive, because they really do a lot to keep communities healthy. But we've also started to talk a lot about what's going on with this whole thing that people are talking about with small businesses and Main Street businesses, and, what's going to happen over the next 6 years or so, as far as people retiring, businesses changing hands, what's going to happen. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But Jay, tell us about you. Tell us about your background. Tell us about your story.
All right. Well, it's a long one, but I guess, I grew up obviously in that family business, like you talked about, all my life working there, high school, college, and then post for 15 years. To keep that part short, I always looked for succession there, and it wasn't really something that openly talked about. So wanting more, I decided, I had saved money and thought it would be to buy into that business, but I ended up buying into a Rita's Italian Ice. Ran that for 11 years, and I was doing both for almost 3, and realizing that my business was suffering because I was trying to do 2 things. I was dedicating a lot of time, but not all my time to it. And, so I just decided it was time to move on. And if the family business presented an opportunity again, great, but it never did. And my business grew, and I kept growing year over year and stuck with it. Fast forward to 2017, and I get back together with a girlfriend from college, and made me start kind of looking at options. Right, we weren't in the same area, so I decided to pursue the relationship instead of the business, and that led me to selling the business in 2022. And then I moved to the Reading area from the Lehigh Valley to be with her. And when I did, I had some real estate holdings. I still do. I bought some more since. So that's kind of a business of its own. But I also decided, I'll get a real estate license and see where that leads me. The first networking event I attended, I ended up running into the guys that I now work for in business brokerage. And, funny thing is when I sold my store, I used a broker to sell it. And there were things I did like and didn't like about the process. But some of the things I liked, I thought I could do that. And, kind of in the back of my head said, maybe one day, but never was real serious about it. And then the opportunity presented itself, and I was like, maybe this is a sign. Maybe it's something I should go for. Everybody kind of thinks they're going to get into real estate, I think.
Yeah.
But, business brokerage has a little more to it. And I had all that business experience, between the family business and running my own that I just felt like could be valuable. And I didn't want to throw that all away for just to be another real estate agent. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's a lot out there, and there weren't a lot of brokers.
Right.
Being in the Lehigh Valley, the broker I found was in Florida. There were none in the area that I could find through searches. I called a few that were in the Philly area, and they specialized in different industries. So the one I went with was the one that other Rita's Italian Ices were using, because corporate was kind of loosely partnered with them. So I just felt like it would be real nice if there was somebody local. There's a ton of other businesses. I know a ton of business owners. And I think even myself going into it wasn't sure how to value my own business, and that's where I think there's a big, gap between what an owner believes a business is worth and what it's actually worth. Because when you go to sell it, you have to have a price that the market will absorb. The market will tell you real quick if you're asking too much, because nobody will be interested. And even if you find someone, you then have to sell it to a bank, because, it's almost like selling it twice. You have to find the buyer, and then you have to find the bank that's going to finance it, because very few people are going to pay out of pocket for something. Even if they have the money, they would much rather finance than spend all their reserves.
So let me ask you a quick question. You had said that you were looking for a broker or worked with a broker when you're selling your store, and there were some challenges there. What do you see, maybe even just in your industry, are some of the challenges that people face when working with a broker? I mean, we're kind of jumping gears here, but you brought it up, so I wanted to just touch on it, because there are, as I said, there's going to be, they call it the Silver Tsunami. People are going to be retiring. People are going to be, whether it's identifying a successor in their business or just selling it outright, which I know there's a lot of people out there who are teaching, especially the younger generation, how to buy Main Street businesses. But people don't necessarily know, and I know because I've worked with them, but those challenges that people face when you are working with a broker. And it's not necessarily an easy task either. So what are some of those, like, just in that industry, are the gaps that you see and what you maybe do differently?
So what I saw when I sold with my broker was, there was someone that was selling me on signing up with them. That was my first point of contact. And then once, and it was very, they were a little bit of pressure. They really want to get you signed up. I'm the type, as a business owner, where, I got to make quick decisions, but I also like to think about that decision first and calculate if that's going to be good or bad for me. So, I felt a little bit of a push on their part, a little, bit of being salesy, I would say.
Sure.
But okay, I went ahead, And then after that, I was handed off to someone else who was then going to put together, the whole marketing package. And then
Mhm.
from there, once we once they started finding buyers, then I was back to the original point of contact, contacting me saying, "Hey, I found a buyer." Um, and I wasn't thrilled with some of the terms in the contract. And
Right.
I kind of told them, I'm not going to sign this until you put it the way I told you to make it in the first place. And she got real pushy at that point. And I just saw that as like I'm in charge here, not you. It's my business. Um,
Mm.
and I think that that's a sticking point, right? All business owners, they're in charge of what they do. They're the one that makes final decisions most times. And when you get somebody that really pushes them, it's like, wait a second, I've succeeded for how many years, and now you're telling me how things are going to be.
Yeah.
There's got to be some give and take, but I still want to feel like I have a most of the say in this. So
Mhm.
anyway, I ended up then saying, okay, we went with the sale once they changed the terms the way I wanted them. And then I was then handed off to somebody that took me through the due diligence. One thing they did fantastic was that guy was great. And we had a weekly call. And every week it would be me, him, and the buyer on a call. And we would say, okay, he would say, this is what I need from you. This is what I need from the buyer. And that way it kept the whole deal moving. And I thought
Yeah.
that was fantastic. But when I looked at it from my perspective, I thought, I would have liked the same person all the time, right? I want to always call and
Mm.
be able to get you as my point of contact. You may have other people in your firm that you're using to do certain jobs, but they should all report back to that broker who then gets to make all the contact with the business owner. To me, that seems like, that would have been the best thing. And that's
It's
how
like
I
the
operate.
insurance. Yeah, it's like the insurance industry. I came from the insurance industry, and who you start out with and who you end up with are two different
Right.
people. And you go through like three or four.
Right. And by the time you're done, you're like, who am I supposed to call for what issue?
Exactly.
Where the way I operate is you're going to talk to me at first. I'm probably going to talk with people in my firm, and I might bring them in on a call, but we'll all be on that call. And then I'll be the point of contact for you. Even if he's going to need something, I'll be involved in that process. So just so there's, familiarity through the whole thing. And then you're
Well,
not saying,
personal.
well, do I contact Jay or do I contact this guy? Um,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I learned though was that having those weekly calls, I do that to this day with buyers and sellers. I don't necessarily put them on the same call all the time because sometimes you have to assess personalities and decide, hey, if the seller's getting a little overwhelmed with all the requests, I don't want him to show that to the buyer when we're on the call. I want the buyer to remain excited about the opportunity. So I may have a call with the seller and say, I need you to get me these documents. And then I'll call the buyer afterwards and say, hey, I just requested these. They should be coming your way in the next couple days. Here's what you should be working on. And that has worked pretty well to keep things on track. The
Mm.
last thing you want to do is put a buyer and seller in the same room without me,
Yeah.
as a mediator, or put them in there when you're feeling that one of them is upset. You don't want to trigger some sort of event that is going to set you back.
Well, and that's, I can imagine because the person who's selling, the business owner who's selling, who had, I mean, this is their original vision. They're looking to transition, and while they want to transition, they want to sell it at the same time. There's so much emotion that's tied into it. So yeah, if they're already hopping through all these people and there's a lot of emotion there, and especially if you have someone who you're selling it to and then they just want to jump in, they're excited or whatever, and they have their own opinion about stuff, there can be a lot of friction there.
Yeah.
and a lot of heightened emotion. And I'm sure, you know, again, like if you have multiple people that you got to hop through and you're not sure who to talk to, that's how deals go south, right?
Yeah. I had a
Yeah.
meeting yesterday with someone and they asked me how much of your job is counseling as opposed to the actual work. And I said a large majority of it. And I think that's also an advantage for me because I went through the process. I'm not just
Mm,
someone who's selling businesses. I sold a business with a broker. So I understand where these owners are coming from, and I understand the
yeah.
emotions. I couldn't wait to get out. And then it was like, well, wait a second. This is what I do every day. So, and I built this up. I mean, I took it from, in 5 years, I increased revenue by 100%. And I
Mm,
was like, I felt that it was a lot of what I had implemented. And
yeah.
I was like, well, are the new owners going to do this stuff? Or, and through the process, they were kind of, great, I'm buying a business, whatever. And it
Yeah.
didn't feel like they had the same care that I had, but I had to understand that, okay, I wanted out and that's what I wanted. And it's time to turn the page and move on. But it's very much like having a child and then saying goodbye to them and saying,
Yeah.
well, how's the world going to treat them? I don't, it's a,
Well, and
it's a
that's
scary feeling.
yeah. And I'll tell you, because that's where you and I align is you had a business, you sold the business, you went through the process. I've been, working in these businesses in the trenches with these business owners, have, rebuilt them, seen what they go through, but I've also been involved in the deal from the internal side of it. And the thing that I worry about, and you just touched on it, is that there is going to be this exchange happens, and there are people who, it's that whole preservation of legacy for what those businesses were built on. And potentially, and I think this is a concern, potentially moving forward, the people that are buying it aren't going to have that same concern. Like, I mean, is that something that is in the back of your mind? It's in the back of my mind.
Yeah, always. I mean, even businesses I haven't sold that I know
Yeah.
the owners. This before I was doing this. A lot of my friends were business owners, and I know ones that exited, and I heard the stories of, and this is partially why my family business didn't sell because they heard these stories of owners that said, "Hey, we found somebody. They see everything's going to be great." And after a week of being there with them, showing them this is what we do, the new owners told them, "Yeah, I don't need you anymore." And they're like, "I've been doing
Mm,
this for 50 years and I've learned every day, and you're good in a week." And they're like, "Yeah, I'll
mm.
figure it out from here." And that just frustrates them to no end. But you know that's a big part of why the family business ours didn't sell because
Right.
they heard that story and they said, "Well, I can't watch somebody destroy our name," and our name
Right.
was the business.
Right.
So
Oh yeah.
the other ones we heard from, it wasn't the family name on the building on the business, and they
Right.
still were frustrated because everybody knew who they were, that they owned that.
So let me ask you, um, I'm gonna switch gears slightly here. So you, so one of the things that you and I have talked about, and again, you approach it from one angle, I come at it from another angle, which is before anybody is getting ready to sell, there are some struggles that some of these businesses have that they need to repair
Mhm.
before they get to that point. What are some things that you've seen that businesses need to focus on before they get to that point? Like, what are some of those struggles that they have?
Well, the things that make you more valuable when you go to market, right, are very simple. But when I say simple, simple in theory, but not everybody does them. If
Sure.
you're there at the business all the time and the business can't operate without you, that's going to be a tougher sell, right? So if
Mhm.
you have trained management you're going to have a much more attractive business, because if you can go on vacation a week and not be missed, that's a good sign, for the business succeeding with a new owner. And that's a
Right.
test I usually ask everybody. Hey, what happens if you go away for a week or two? Um, the next thing is, the business owner has done it and they've told everybody what to do, but do they have written standard operating procedures? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times they don't, because they've just told this person has told that person. And then that makes it so that somebody new comes in and now you have to teach again. Whereas if you have, SOPs, as we call them, that's easy. They just take out that file and read it, and you may be able to give them a little teaching on it, or, hey, this is how I did it, but it's all written. So they don't have to keep contacting you. You can have a smoother transition and get out of there faster if everything is documented. And then
Right.
the other big thing is kind of two things in one, right? If it's a restaurant type business, cash type business, are they taking cash out? And then they expect to get paid for it, because the bank can't see that, and the bank
Yeah.
won't finance money they can't see. And you're not going to easily be able to convince a buyer that that money exists,
Mm.
because you've been hiding it. So if your multiple at selling time is 2.5 or 3, whatever that cash is that you took out last year, if it was 30,000, well, that's 90,000, at 75 to 90,000 at closing time, because that would be that obviously would go straight to your bottom line, because you didn't need it for expenses if you took it straight out. Um, but going with that, the other thing is having clean financials, having
Mm.
an accountant, or even better, a CPA that is doing your financials, doing at least your tax returns. Everybody keeps QuickBooks for the most part. It's cheaper, and
Standard.
it's relatively easy. But then
Mm-hmm.
they deliver that to the accountant. Well, you should not only have QuickBooks, but you should have your accountant tell you how to organize it, so that it
Mm.
is very clean looking, so that it's not the accountant knows how to decipher what's what. It should be, he could pass that on to another accountant and he would easily know, okay, I understand this. I understand the way these things are entered in here. And that just makes the sale that much easier, because every buyer in due diligence is going to ask for not only your tax returns, but usually monthly P&Ls, probably bank statements, everything that's going to show that that tax return is accurate, right? I want to see everything that led up to that return. And if you have a CPA, or at least an accountant doing it, there's more trust in that than if you're
Sure.
doing TurboTax, which I would
Yeah.
never recommend someone
No,
to do. It's bad
never.
enough that individuals do it, let alone a business would be, that
Yeah.
would be incredibly bad.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Yeah. It's funny. I was actually involved in two deals where the businesses were, one was a merger into a larger entity, and the other one was a complete sale. Both of them went south in due diligence because there was information that was hidden in both scenarios. One was information where financials were inflated. The other one was kind of the same thing, but then other stuff was buried that wasn't accounted for. So that due diligence piece, and I think, you know, people people don't realize what's involved in the whole process, um, or and I got to tell you, in my day working with business owners, I've run into more people that have worked with accountants who weren't the greatest, and then when it came time to do something with their business, they had all kinds of problems that we had to clean up. But I don't think, I was going to say that I don't think people fully understand what happens during due diligence and why, yes, you have this seller and you're working on the deal, and it's not done until you go through that whole process. And then like the final is situated. And I think that's a big piece, especially, like some business owners just, they kind of, take money out over the years, or, do certain things. And then again, when it comes time for this, not everything's accounted for. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. There's a few things to that, right? First of all, the reason to start having a discussion before the day you're ready to sell is to try and make sure that you have all these things
Yep.
organized and in line so that due diligence does not derail you.
Right.
What happens when due diligence derails a deal is the seller gets deal fatigue, because at first, they make the tough decision to sign up to sell their business. And then we go through the marketing and they're sitting back and I'm answering calls and I'm contacting them and they're feeling good that people are interested in their business. But then when we start getting letters of intent, they feel like, hey, great. Yeah, I got a deal. Well, that just starts the due diligence period.
Yep.
And so what I always tell them is you just picked up a second job now because I'm going to be requesting stuff from you. And yeah, you're running your business. And then in your spare time, you're going to have to get me all these documents. And sometimes that means, telling an administrator who doesn't know about the sale, hey, I need all this. Well, why do you need it? Well, I'm doing a review, whatever it is, give them some story. But it becomes like a weight on the seller. And
Mm-hmm.
once they get through all that document, exchange, they're kind of like, man, breathe a sigh of relief. Well, if that deal falls apart and they realize we have to go back through this whole process again, they get really, really, upset about it. And it doesn't feel great. What I always try to say, and I've only had it happen maybe once so far, is that you've already given me all the documents. So next time will be easier. But
Right.
it's just tough because they thought they saw the finish line. And now that, as they say, the goalposts have been moved, right?
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's just tough. It's part of the mental process of this.
Right.
It's ups and downs. You think you got to win, but now you got a setback.
Which is definitely, I think that's the piece, that people don't, they kind of discount it. They focus on the transaction that happens and the tactical stuff that needs to happen. They start to learn about that, such as, okay, here's all the things that you're going to need to do in that due diligence process. But when that fatigue starts to set in, it's the emotional piece. And it's like, that's the part that people just kind of breeze over and think, oh, I'll be okay. Like, and you're right, like the goalpost starts moving because certain things start happening. They start getting, frustrated or tired because it's a lot of back and forth. And just, I think all of that. And then on top of it, the realization of what's next for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
What am I
Again,
doing next?
this is why you start the conversation 3 years before you want to say, you say,
Oh, so you say three?
well, it doesn't have to be, but if it's a lot of people don't say, I want to sell until they're like, I want out now, and then I
Yeah.
have to tell them, listen, the average is 9 to 11 months for a sale from the time that we put you on the market. It could go faster, it could take longer. That's why it's an average. But if
Mm-hmm.
you were understanding at that point, like, hey, this could take a couple years, okay, great. Then, somebody like you, I could say, hey, they're not really ready. So I could bring you in and you would say, okay, this is what you need to do to really look great. But if that conversation is had 3 years in advance and they're prepared for 3 more years of working, well, that becomes very easy to fix all the problems, right? Because then you can come in, tell them what needs to be done. I can tell them this is what our buyers are looking for. And then we can really position them in a way that they can maximize their value, right? The less time that they plan, the less value they're going to get out of the sale. It's very
Sure.
much like going into business. The day you open usually is not, maybe it's your best day because you're new, right? But you had a plan. You didn't open without a plan for a year or 2 years prior to that. And the longer you planned and the more detailed you were, the more successful you are. It's the same way exiting the business, and selling a business is unfortunately not the same as selling the product, right?
Right.
I always say selling a hamburger is not the same as selling the hamburger stand. It's
Yep.
two totally different things.
No, absolutely. And I think that's where, as you said, like a lot of business owners, they don't do that preparation. I mean, I normally tell people when I'm working with them, depending on how old they are, one of the questions is like, what is your long-term and what is your long-term goal? Like, and they might not know, if I'm working with somebody and they're 45 or 50, they might not know, I want to sell the business, I want to build it so that I can sell it, or I want to build it so that I can pass it off. Is it something that's going to be generational, or is it something that, I've been involved in many deals where the business owner identifies, potentially someone inside the business that they want to eventually sell it to. I've been involved in that as well. So, but I always tell people when we're working together, okay, depending on what you want to do, here's how much time you're going to need because this is what's going on with your business right now. You have to build that resilience into it, as you said. Not be the person who's making all the decisions, not be the person who is the go-to person for everything so that you get to a point where, yeah, you can't take a vacation. Like there's certain things that have to be set up first. And then even if you are a business owner who identifies, okay, you know what? Like this person's worked for me for a long time. Potentially I want to start working with them so that they can be the person to take over someday. And a lot of business owners don't think that because they're focused so heavily on what's happening in the current circumstance that they can't wrap their head around it. So I think even more important to have a resource like me, like you, to kind of start guiding them through the process so that they get the most, the most value out of their business if they are selling it, or if they are going to pass it down to someone, um you know it's that gap is being filled, or you're building a bridge between what was and what's going to be.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important.
Yeah, whether you sell the business to the public or you're passing it on to someone, you still need to prepare the same way. You still need to
Absolutely.
have all the things we talked about earlier in place, standard operating procedures, good books, all of that still matters, removing yourself from the business. I had one, we do valuations as well, which is to determine the value of the business, and you can do those anytime. An accountant will charge you 15, 20,000. We usually charge significantly less, 3,500 to 5,000. But for us, it's, the accountants don't sell businesses. We do. So for
Right.
us, it's just like a value add thing that, hey, we can do this. And if you're happy with us years later, we exist. Maybe you'll use us to sell. But we put
Yeah.
out the same product that those accountants are. Now, we did one 2 years ago for a business that I brought in, and they were convinced they were going to sell. And there were three partners. They thought they would sell to their key man. Then they got the number. They kind of looked at it and said, "Boy, I don't know if that's enough for me to walk away." But they understood the value. They said, "Yeah, that seems accurate. But do I really want to retire at that number?" Um,
Mm.
and the key man said, "Well, I really don't have the money to do this. I just went through a divorce. I got a young kid, but I love this job. I don't want to work anywhere else." And so they tossed the idea around for the last 2 years. What are we going to do? And they finally came together. It was three partners. The two partners are going to buy out the third because he really wants out. And then they're going to bring that key man in, raise his responsibility and his pay, and basically put him in a position that he'll be able to buy down the road. The other two partners are going to take less money, still be somewhat involved, and kind of satisfy their need for fulfillment,
Yeah.
as far as work goes, but still also be able to travel and enjoy their life, more freely than they were when they were heavily involved. So
Yeah.
that valuation led them to a plan, so again, they weren't pressed to move 2 years ago. And that led them to be able to make a good decision over a longer period of time. So,
Yeah.
again, planning ahead in this situation worked perfectly for them.
Awesome. No, that's so key. And you brought up a key point, um which is great to like kind of close this conversation out, is you really have to ask yourself, what do I want? Like, what is that vision that I have for this next part of my life? What do I want? Like, what do I need to live that legacy lifestyle, to do the things that I want to do, with who I want to do them, when I want to do them? What does that look like? And I think, like I said, to kind of round this conversation out, I think that's key, because it's the classic Stephen Covey, I think, said it: start with the end result in mind. Like, what is it that you're looking to do? And then start to work backwards from there. Because if someone just jumps into it, they go with the original valuation that they get, potentially it's not going to support and fuel that next phase of their life. And I think that's a big mistake that a lot of people make, is, again, they're just jumping into this and just taking the first deal that they see. um, my last quick question for you before I ask you my last question. So if you were to give someone one, like, piece of advice that you learned in this process, what would that short piece of advice be?
From the perspective of my
A
current
seller,
role or from being a seller?
being a seller.
Uh, you think you're ready, and you are eager, and even when you get out, I was very happy. I was like, oh, this is the greatest day of my life. I can remember coming home after the exchange of keys and being like, oh man, have a drink, sit on the deck. And I was like, life is great now.
Yeah.
And, in no time, you know, maybe 6 months to a year, you're like, okay, now what? So it's not just like you said, you want to make sure you're financially prepared for the future, but are you really ready for the void that is left
Yep.
by, I was putting in 12, 13 hours a day. So it became, sure, I don't really want to do 12 or 13 hours a day, but how many chores can I do? How many projects that I had lined up until I run out and I have a big void, and, that 5 o'clock drink turns to a 4 o'clock drink, turns to a three. And then next thing you know, you're drinking at noon. Just, not saying it's a problem, but, having your cocktail an hour earlier every day.
It's not a
Uh,
problem. What the
but
heck?
it just becomes, there's a void,
Mm,
you know, and a lot of people, I wasn't old enough or in it long enough to tie my self worth to it, but I've seen other people who worked 50 years, who a big part of their who they were was that job. You
yep.
know, they served the public, and they no longer had all those customers who they considered friends. Now they
Yeah.
didn't that didn't mean they got together with them every weekend or for a dinner once a month even, but they still considered them friends. They came in, how are your kids? Oh, my kids are great. How about yours? And they shared in their life experiences, and then that's no longer there. So their
Hmm.
circle also shrinks, and they're not necessarily prepared for any of that.
Yep. That's the I call that the transition identity. and like really understanding, because again, it's the piece that people gloss over because they're just focused on that current moment instead of saying like, who do I want to be? Like, who do I want to be? What do I want to do? Where do I want to go? What does that look like? And you're right. I mean, some of these people go into these deals, they sell the business, they're only 55 and they're like, what am I going to do with myself now? So I think that's a really, really great piece of advice. Very strong. And again, something that most people don't think about. So to give people that insight, is just going to help them even more. So thank you so much for joining me. This has been an amazing conversation. I had all these questions, and every time I was going to ask you the question, you answered it. So this was a great conversation. I think people are going to get a lot of tips out of this. So before I let you go, I just want to ask you, what are you most grateful for?
All the experiences I've had through my entire working journey, through a family business and just growing up in that, seeing that anything is possible if you just work hard at it. Owning my own business and understanding what it was to manage other people. Being the one that was responsible for others, and providing for them, providing a good work environment, working with the public. I still miss that to some degree.
Yeah.
Like I just talked about a minute ago. And then, how it just has continued to evolve. It's like always been one step to the next, always growing, always learning. Like to me, that's always been it. I've always been curious. So for me to always continuously learn and grow, that's been one of the greatest things. And also to work with family, while that can be extremely stressful at times, I always say, one thing you can always make more money. You can't create more time. So to be able to be around, parents, grandparents, and see them a lot more than most people do, and even further cousins and, aunts and uncles, it was just an amazing, experience. And I feel blessed for all of it.
Nice. Wonderful. Well, thank you so very much for joining me here. And thank you for sharing all of your amazing insights and wisdom. How can people find you online?
Well, online, LinkedIn is basically my only social media. So just my name,
Okay.
Jay Calandra, on social media, on LinkedIn, I should say. And
Okay.
then they can reach out to me that way. Our company website is Mid-Atlantic BAS, stands for Mid-Atlantic Business Advisory Services. And so it's midatlanticbas.com. We can be reached that way. My
Wonderful.
email is j.calandra@midatlanticbas.com. And, they can find me those ways. And
Awesome.
I'm listed on Biz Buy Sell as well. They can look me up there on the broker directory.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone, check out Jay's LinkedIn feed. Get in touch with him if you are a business owner who is looking to sell your business. They do amazing work. Jay is an amazing person to work with, and definitely a huge resource for people. So until next week, thank you, Jay, for joining us. And until next week, I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. And let's all take care of each other just a little bit more than we already do. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Theresa.
Hey there. Thank you so much for listening. If you found value on this show, please follow the podcast so you never, ever miss an episode. And I would love, love, love if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for me. Even better, share the show with a fellow business owner ready to step fully into their CEO leadership role. because right now more than ever, the world really needs next level leaders. And by the way, did you know you can text me all your questions and get real-time feedback? You absolutely can. Just text the word CEO to me at 610-215-2838 to get connected. One last goodie for you before I go. If you're ready to scale your business and have a co-creator working right by your side, my C-Suite Mentor Program may be perfect for you and your possible new second in command. Just visit thecsuitementor.com to get started.